Hello friends, and welcome to the highly requested 100 Days in Cottagecore Minecraft Horse Edition. If you want to play on the same mod pack as in this video, I'll link the CurseForge download below, and if you love horses, make sure to like the video. Plus, I'm giving you a very special 10% off all models and toys on pinehavenponies.co.uk. Before we begin, my question to you is, if you were a species of magical horse, what would you be and why? Pegasus, unicorn, kelpie, hippocampus, sleipnir, or fairy horse? Tell me in the comments and subscribe to see more horse game content. Day 1 and we are off to a magnificent start. The world is beautiful, the sun is just starting to rise, and I've already got my hands on some wood thanks to the acacia trees dotted around the savannah. Now I do like this biome, but I don't think it's super cottagecore-y, so I probably won't be settling down here. After making a crafting table, a small tunnel caught my attention. Here I made my first wooden pickaxe and oh, look how freaking cute it is! I'm using a texture pack that makes the tools all 3D and flowery. Oh, also this is my normal horse girl skin. Later on in the video I change into my true cottagecore form, but you'll have to wait to see it. So into the tunnel I went, first grabbing stone, upgrading my pickaxe, and then working my way through the abundant iron and coal ore veins. When I say abundant, I mean freakishly abundant. I think it was something to do with the world generation, because by the evening I had a full set of iron tools and this incredibly adorable iron helmet that looked like a flower crown. When night fell, I chose to travel, not in any particular direction. I just wanted to explore and see what kind of biomes were nearby. Now, you may have noticed at this point that there are no hostile mobs, and that's because I'm playing on peaceful mode. But Abby, your hunger bar is still going down, and what about all the mob drops that you need? Well, I feel like actively battling creatures that want to kill me isn't exactly cottagecore. Plus, after 100 days in a zombie apocalypse, I needed a break, but I still wanted to have an honest Minecraft experience. So I got a mod that adds hunger to peaceful mode and allows you to craft mob drops so I wouldn't be missing out on any of the recipes. Because the night was no longer dangerous, I enjoyed a cozy campfire under the stars while I waited for my beef to cook. When the sun rose on day 2, I made myself a boat in anticipation of water travel. Shortly after setting off, I found myself distracted by a small ravine where I continued to gather resources. Listen, in this cottagecore challenge, I have big plans for buildings and stables, so if I can avoid spending hours in the mines later, I was absolutely going to get this done early. Emerging around 10 AM, I hopped and skipped my way through a forest where I found a river mouth. Here I gathered some ink sacks for later and discovered the river ran directly under the mountain. As cool as that was, I didn't want to waste precious daylight underground any longer, so I set sail for the open ocean. Here I spotted an abundance of wildlife, lobsters, whales, and fish. Here I also collected my first bits of kelp, which was super important in crafting tack for the horses. I briefly went ashore to pick some watermelons, but found my inventory was full. Now I was in full eco-friendly cottagecore mode, so instead of just throwing items and littering on the ground, I went and made a composter to compost some of the items that I didn't need. I was trying to leave as little damage to the environment as possible. Soon I was back in my boat and travelling towards the sunset. After paddling in the night, I managed to spot some cherry blossom trees, and nothing is more cottagecore than those, so I opted to park up the boat and explore this area. It took me a little while to get up the super steep bank, but I accidentally found a village, which I was very excited about. I almost immediately found this super pretty white cat, but I didn't have any fish to tame it with. Now this place was absolutely filled to the brim with items and resources. However, it is not very cottagecore girly to steal things from small communities. So after fawning over all the pretty buildings, I decided instead to offer a service to the villagers by clearing out their cobwebs. It was a really nice trade-off. They would get clean houses and I would get the string from the cobwebs so that I could make a backpack. I scoured from top to bottom looking for cobwebs, but clearly this village was on top of their cleaning because I only found 3, which was not enough to make my backpack with. Day 3 had arrived and I was enamored with the delicious food from this bakery I had found, and normally everything in here would already be in my pockets, but if I wanted a delicious pie, I would have to make some myself. Deciding my services were not needed here, I went to move on, but pretty quickly fell in love with this beautiful clearing that was nestled amongst the cherry grove with full view of the mountain behind it. As stunning as this place was, I just felt it was too small for the type of place I wanted to build, plus I didn't have any materials to get started with yet. So I continued on following the mountain around into a much bigger plains clearing where I spotted a great big tower. This was a large village and I didn't know what awaited me there, but I was excited to explore. Very quickly after arriving, I found a terribly placed lava pool had eaten an entire building and was causing another to be set ablaze. I quickly threw down my crafting table, cobbled together a bucket and filled it from the village fountain. Rushing back, I used the water to turn the lava into obsidian and tried my best to put out the remaining flames. The two owners of the house were whispering in front of the door, which I thought was strange, but I barged inside to check for any stray fires. Luckily, it seemed the panic was over and I happened to open a chest which contained a saddle. And I totally still stood by the no stealing thing, but I'm sure if someone saved your house from going up in flames, you'd give them your saddle, right? After the whole debacle, I went towards a building on the outskirts of town which had a few bee boxes. Inside, I discovered a library, and what better place to find cobwebs than dusty old bookshelves? The attic was caked in the stuff, and after helping myself, I wandered back into the village where suddenly fireworks went off. What was even stranger was after that, all the villagers rushed into their homes. Later, I realized this was because of a daylight sensor attached to some dispensers, but it was still pretty cool to see. I crafted my backpack, yay! And then set up a little camp on the outskirts. In the light of my campfire, I improved my backpack storage with copper and iron. Then I added a special type of upgrade which would allow me to craft inside the pack on the go. While I was at it, I crafted the necessary dyes to transform the bland leather backpack into a light pink cottagecore bag. I think I look pretty snazzy. The sun rose on day 4 and I dumped a load of items into my backpack and took a stroll to the other side of the village. I spotted a snowy patch and further on a small sea where some whales were playing. Well, I thought they were playing until I saw that they were just throwing squid up into the air in order to kill them, which was kind of scary. On the plus side, I could just hop in my boat and collect the ink sacs guilt-free, so that was something, I guess. Rowing much further out, I realized this sea was almost totally walled in by huge cliffs on both sides, a bit like the bowl in the Ice Age movies. I did not love how the stone towered above me, so I went back to the village and did some more exploring of the area. Here I wandered into the forest and just sort of kept going until I found myself at some sunflower plains at sunset. There was a herd of bison out by the tree line, and to my absolute surprise, right in the middle of this herd was a Carmela donkey just hanging out. I was thrilled to have found my first ecquid and looked around to see if this gorgeous donkey had a herd, but it seemed like they were with the bison. Night fell pretty quickly, and although I had managed to catch the donkey, I was struggling to tame it. This was when I realized the reason I couldn't mount was because they were only 12 hands tall and were much too small to ride. I did also find out it was a boy, so I started the long trek back to my campsite with a new donkey in tow. I did even briefly consider making this new area my home, but unfortunately I felt it was just too big and I wanted to be way closer to the village. I was still yet to find my Goldilocks place. Day 5, I crested the hill beyond the village and wait, is that house on fire again? I rushed into the village, grabbing my bucket of water and frantically tried to put out the flames. After absolutely struggling to contain this fire, the house was in pretty bad ruin. Why on earth had it set ablaze again? I do not know. The only conclusion I could come to was possible insurance fraud. And you know what? These two probably hated me for interfering. I found myself in the village church where here I discovered a brewing stand. This was just brilliant. I could brew cantazorite potions to make the swem horses straight away without needing to craft a brewing stand myself. Oh, if you're not familiar with this mod, you have to brew a cantazorite potion and give it to a vanilla horse to turn it into a swem horse. Heading back to the camp, my donkey was waiting for me and I decided to go and actually look at the plains next to the village. I realized I had completely failed to fully appreciate this space as I was always busy looking beyond it. After building up to get a better view, it became clear. My Goldilocks land was right under my nose. It had enough space for me to build exactly what I wanted, but it also afforded a stunning view of the mountain and wasn't too far from the village. Wanting to make sure I had a good source of wool, I went and grabbed some sheep nearby. I'm pretty sure they didn't belong to the village, so it's okay. I securely tied them at my campsite and found a villager had made themselves at home in my bed, which was a little strange, but mi casa su casa, I guess. Then in the dead of night, I went into the woods to get a head start on gathering logs for building. It was then that a small glow caught my attention. Getting closer, I could see a sign that read, "Here lies Lian Shanbo and Zhu Yingtai." I don't know who they were, but they must have been loved as there was a lily of the valley placed on their grave. Oddly, the light was actually coming from a glass bottle in the back of the headstone. I could see a butterfly was stuck under the ground, and I think it was supposed to be inside the bottle, but once I freed the little guy, it flew around like a sparkle in the forest. I followed closely behind, feeling hypnotized by its glow, and eventually it stopped to rest in the trees. Not wanting to bother it anymore, I went back to the clearing. Day 9 was a bit soggy, and I spent some time trying to flatten parts of the land. This was important for both having a nice clear area to build and having spare dirt to cover up any holes or cracks in the earth. Now at this point, I had already decided on the building palette I wanted to go with, and it might be super familiar because it's the same one I used in the original 100 Days video, which had a house designed by Croissant Cat. The main blocks were white concrete, granite, oak logs, and oak planks. Honestly, at this point, all my builds use this color palette because it's just so pretty and it works really well with any splash of color you add for decoration. I'd already gone ahead and found another tutorial by Croissant Cat. This time, it was much more cottagecore themed, and you might have noticed it doesn't use the blocks I just mentioned, but it's okay because I was going to adapt it to fit. Figuring it was going to be cold and dreary all day, I chose to make yet another trip underground. This time I focused on grabbing stone, granite, iron, and cantazorite. I also happened to stumble across a skunk-infested cave, and without fear of a warden standing in the dark, this place felt like an ethereal night sky. I managed to grab myself some sparkly amethysts before re-emerging on day 7. I gave my sheep a little pen so they wouldn't have to be tied down, and went to the shore to collect some clay. I would have loved to be riding my donkey, but it was such a shame that he was too small. Since I had my boat on me, I wanted to hop in and follow the river back upstream. Like the first river I had found, this ran directly under the mountain and into a huge lush cave. The gloom inside was absolutely magical, and I made sure to grab some glowberries and spore blossoms for decoration later. Traveling all the way through the winding cave brought me out to the village by a river on day 8. Here, they were on the same wavelength about the cottagecore vibes, and I took a few inspiration photos for when I started building, which I promise starts soon. They even had a butterfly feeding shed, and I might have borrowed a few apples. In the village, I had a super exciting and heartbreaking moment. I found my first horse, but it was very clearly inside a small paddock which belonged to the village. So unfortunately, as per my no stealing rule, I couldn't just take it. The baby was a super pretty overo and was even tacked up, but I had to be a good person and leave them with their rightful owners. A little bit sad, I rode onwards into a desert where I made sure to gather lots of sand. This was important for making the white concrete for my house and stables, and for any glass bottles or windows that I needed. I was very lucky and found a desert temple, which was half buried in the sand and had no inhabitants, so I thought it would be okay to take the stuff I found in the chests, since the owners were clearly long gone. I mostly found sand and bones, which was really great, as again, it would help me craft the white concrete. As night fell, I hopped over to an abandoned pillager outpost, and I found these poor little trapped allays, which of course I freed immediately. I'm going to be totally honest, I don't really know what allays do, but they seemed happy to just fly around. I did end up taking from the pillager chest because pillagers are the bad guys anyway, so is it really stealing if they literally pillaged for this stuff in the first place? I guess I'm just cottagecore Robin Hood. In the night, I found yet another desert temple with loads of bones and some horse XP potions, which was nice. Day 9, just as the sun was rising, I found an absolutely beautiful desert village. I'm going to be honest and say this village single-handedly inspired me to do 100 days in a desert with horses challenge, so let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like to see. Now, I did offer a service to the village by harvesting and replanting their crops for them for the low price of getting to keep the extra harvest. Honestly, at this point, it's just 100 days of Abigail being morally grey in a cottagecore setting. As beautiful as this place was, I moved on to a terracotta outcrop and gathered some materials. I already knew some of the decor needed terracotta in order to be crafted, so by this point, I basically had everything I needed to get started on my dream cottagecore home. On my way back, I came across a really pretty pink butterfly, which I tried and failed to catch, so I gave up and carried on home. Day 10, I arrived home and it was building time. Usually I start with the stables, but this time I wanted to have the house down first so that I could position the stables and paddocks in the most aesthetic view. But before any of the fun stuff, I had to craft my concrete powder and then wet the powder to make concrete blocks. People told me last time that there were better ways to do this than my method, which is the one I'm showing here. So if you play in survival, what technique do you use to wet concrete powder? That took absolutely all day. So at 1 AM on day 11, I was smelting my glass blocks and going into the forest to stock up on even more wood. At around 6 AM, it started raining again, but I pushed on, further flattening and sculpting the land to fit my future home. Then I marked out the outline of where all the walls were going to be. This was super duper important to get right so that construction later would go as smoothly as possible. After everything has been measured, checked, and checked again, because I'm known for making mistakes, I put in the foundations. The floor was going to be entirely oak planks, and once that was filled in, the oak log supports went up. The real reason I'm building in this order is because that's how the tutorial does it. But honestly, I really love this method because it made me feel like I was really constructing a house. Just a little thing, but I quite enjoyed it. By 6 PM, it was getting dreadfully dark, but I pushed on. Apologies if you're struggling to see what I'm doing here. I didn't think to bring out my lantern yet. After that, I put in the granite accents on the foundations, and by just after 8, I started filling in the walls on the ground floor. Just before it ticked over to day 12, I finally remembered to take out my lantern, so you should be able to see now, and I had put in some stairs to get up to the first floor. Here I started putting in the log supports again, but instead of moving directly onto the walls, I made the outline for the roof. I personally really struggle with roof designs, as you can see here on this building live stream I did. Not fitting the vibe. That's better, right? That is better. Even more like a dungeon. Thanks, Flickers. Oh, and if you subscribe and hit the bell icon, you can get notified when I'm live, or join the Horse Game Discord server and grab yourself the stream notification roll. They usually happen Saturday and Sunday at 4 PM British time. We do a whole bunch of horse games, including Minecraft, so I'd love to see you there. During the day, I was filling in the moss on the roof, and I really love how Croissant Cat made it look a bit like a hobbit house, which I feel like is ultimate cottagecore. Side note as well, I've been told I look a little like Frodo Baggins, which I'm not entirely sure how to feel about. So with my hobbit roof complete, I moved on to the finishing touches, which included a little overhanging roof bit, I'm not sure what the technical name is, and filling in the upstairs walls. At this point, I'm running a little low on wood, so I'm back in the woods after dark. I was minding my business when, out of nowhere, I saw this blue, glowing, sparkly butterfly flitting around the trees. I completely abandoned my wood cutting to follow this ethereal butterfly. It was pitch black, so I had absolutely no idea where I was going. I just had this feeling I was being led somewhere. It stopped a few times to rest on the trees or the ground, and at one point I was sure I was just walking in circles until it flew into a small clearing. Here the moonlight illuminated the meadow, and standing in the middle of it was a horse. The butterfly had landed on the ground, but I didn't feel like it was to rest, but instead to say, "Here." It had led me through the forest to this horse, like some kind of spirit showing me destiny. I approached closer and she looked at me, and I couldn't help but feel like this was meant to be. I mean, how many times does a glowing butterfly lead you to your first wild horse in the middle of the night? I grabbed her with my lead and she followed without fuss, and standing next to the butterfly that had shown me this place, I thought I must have been the luckiest person to have this happen to me. Maybe it was the eco-conscience, maybe it was the theming, or maybe it was just luck. But whatever it was, I was thankful it had brought me to this horse. In the dead of night, I left the butterfly behind and set off into the woods, aiming for home. Day 13, we made it back just before dawn broke, and in the early morning light, I could now see she was in fact a gorgeous red roan. The shell of my house served as a hitching point, but now I absolutely had to get the stables up so that she would be comfortable and happy here. Abandoning my house for now, I started clearing a large chunk of land and marking out where I thought the stables could go. I marked out the size, but then decided that no, this horse deserves something non-traditional. Instead of single stables with turnouts, instead I would create a beautiful free choice shelter in honor of the butterfly that chose me. I worked all through the night to get this finished as quickly as possible, and by day 14 it had started to come together. I had included a tower for aesthetics, and the side with fences would be where the horses could have a rest, and the other side would be where I built a tack and feed room. Yes, I said horses, because do you really think I'm stopping at one? At the back, I started putting in the paddock. I really badly wanted to make a paddock track system. I think those are the coolest and so good for horses, and if I ever get real ones, I'm absolutely making one for them. I didn't manage to do this time, but I did actually achieve it on my building livestream, and I adore how it came out. Instead, I went a bit smaller and followed the curve of the land to keep it natural. Minecraft fences and terrain changes do not go well together, so this was what was easiest. The view from the paddock was pretty spectacular, so I'm sure Marshmallow and my new horse would love it. Speaking of Marshmallow, after I brought in the new horse, I went over to my campsite to grab him. I did get a little distracted with crafting, so it was pretty dark by the time I led him back to the paddock. The two equines met for the first time, and I don't think they were too fussed about each other, probably because they were both solo flyers in the wild. I went back to camp to make some gates so that they could wander freely, but first I got distracted and crafted the items needed to make Cantazorite potions. Eventually, I did get round to creating the gates, and it's a cottagecore challenge, so instead of making my usual light grey ones, which look like realistic metal, I went with pink, of course. Then I headed into the village to brew the potions. Since it was still dark, I opted to fill in the windows of my house with light grey stained glass, which in this texture pack looks like white cottagecore windows. Unfortunately though, as much as I love this super big window upstairs, I sacrificed it in the name of symmetry, but I thought the view would still look stunning. As the sun rose on day 15, I installed the brand new pink gates, which allowed me to untie Marshmallow and the roan. Before turning her into a swem horse, I had to make sure I could meet all her needs, which included having water buckets and feeders. So once again, I trekked all the way back to camp to smelt my kelp and make buckets, spigots, and troughs. Then, in the dark, I filled in most of the tack room wall and windows, and by this point I wanted a joint tack and feed room since it would be more of an open space rather than little separated cubbies. Day 16, I was putting in the front windows and the building was looking super pretty. I was really happy with it. Today, I was also a tad nervous because I was turning the roan into a swem horse. I don't know why that made me nervous, but it's such a big, irreversible change that I wanted to be a special moment because of how incredibly this horse came to me. In preparation, I tied Marshmallow off to the side because when you transform a swem horse, you have to retame them and they do kick, so this was for his own safety. In the early morning, I was ready to commit and I gave her the potion and bam, swem horse. She did turn out in a beautiful dark bay, but I would later change that to resemble her original coat. First, I had to tame her, and while she stood quietly with me on her back for a bit, she did rear and throw me off a few times before being tamed. Then, using lapis and redstone, I scrolled through so many coats before landing on this custom one called VS Code Red by Ashira. It was such a beautiful shade of strawberry and even had a stripe and 2 socks to match. Now, the biggest challenge: her name. Of course, I ran to my Discord server and my Instagram to ask for name suggestions. You can join the Discord using the link below, or follow me on Instagram. I'm at Abigail Pinehaven. After some amazing name suggestions, I just couldn't pass up the name put forward by Mr. Error on our Discord, which was Chapel, after Chapel Roan, the singer. It was perfect because Roan, like her coat, and she released a song called Pink Pony Club. I was in absolute awe of Chapel. She looks so stunning, and I think she loved her new paddock because it didn't take long for her to start munching on the grass. I decided I would leave her to acclimatize to her new environment and her new body too. Well, that's what I told myself, and it's totally not because I hadn't actually made any tack to ride her in yet. Oh, by the way, I ended up naming the donkey Marshmallow as per our name suggestions by Sundrop and Spooks on our Discord. With tack crafting in mind, I decided that a storeroom could wait no longer, so I turned to my favorite builder, Croissant Cat, for more inspo. I found exactly what I needed because they had actually made a storage house, and I knew I could adapt it to my current build palette. Off I went, clearing land and marking out the outline. Through the night, I was building away, periodically pausing to check the tutorial. It wasn't too hard to swap the palette out, and I had more than enough materials to complete it. Plus, I adapted the roof to mirror my hobbit house because I actually hadn't done that on the stables. I think I just preferred the wood roof on it since the structure was so big, whereas the house and storage shed were a lot more modest in comparison. The outside had pretty much been completed by the afternoon of day 17, and I kind of loved it. Next, I had to redo the floor and started putting in the interior. In the night, I was back at camp crafting crates for all my items so that they could be stored neatly and aesthetically. By day 18, almost everything was in place. I had loads of storage as well as a really cute crafting bench and smelting area. A final touch was the iron wind chimes I used, which was so cottagecore and peaceful. Day 19, I had moved all my items into the correct containers and labeled them using item frames. This was by far the nicest looking storage shed I had ever made, and I was very excited to start crafting in here. In the night, I officially deconstructed my campsite and dragged the sheep closer to the stables. I didn't have a place for them just yet, so they would just have to hang out here. I ended up having to sleep in the storage room, but it was kind of cozy. Day 20, I woke up to a breathtaking view. The mountain backdrop behind the house, framed by cherry trees and the wind chimes, is something I can only dream about one day having in real life. Today, I was tasked with tack making, which turned out to be far more complicated than I had anticipated, as you had to craft refined leather as well as a bunch of other random items. Needing to go out to collect leaves, I passed Chapel and Marshmallow on my way, and I think they were looking pretty happy. After gathering the necessary resources, I committed to making Chapel's tack color mint because I thought it would go well with her reddish coat. To check I liked it, I did have her model the mint brown English bridle, and I think she looked gorgeous, so off I went to make the rest. Before I forgot, I also got 2 name tags, one for Marshmallow and one for Chapel. In the early morning of day 21, I popped down her mint green tack box, and while waiting for her to get up, I renovated the floor in the tack and feed room. When it was finally light out, I went to the paddock to get Chapel all dressed up in her new tack, which included a brown and mint bridle, brown English saddle, mint saddle pad, and matching mint ear bonnet and leg wraps. I hopped on her and she was super quiet. I was a bit nervous about bumping my head on the overhead railing, but I managed to just squeeze under. Not wanting to push things too fast, we started with a nice active trot and stayed in that gait while she warmed up. She had a really nice stride and didn't rear or buck at all. Feeling confident, I asked for a canter and she picked it up beautifully. Mind you, I had a full back backpack on too, so for her first ride out, she was doing spectacularly. I really didn't want to push it, so we just cantered around the fields by the stables, and while the ground wasn't very even, she kept a really nice rhythm. I thought it would be cute to ride down to the beach, when suddenly I was distracted by a herd of wild horses that spawned by the coast. These guys certainly weren't there before, and I was immediately captivated by a beautiful white horse. I did have a cheeky look around to see if there were any others that caught my eye, and while they were all really pretty, I wanted to try and limit myself to just one this time. If you had to pick, which one would you have taken home? I leashed the grey horse and hopped back on Chapel. I wasn't sure how she was going to react, suddenly having to pony a wild horse she had never met, so we started with a calm walk. Being the angel that she is, she had absolutely no problem, so I felt safe in asking for a pace increase. We trotted back to the stables where I had to navigate getting Chapel in, then the wild horse, all while keeping Marshmallow inside. Well, it turned out that would be futile anyway because Marshmallow somehow climbed the fence while I was coming in and just stood there. Eventually everyone was in and I got to go over and admire this handsome chap. Not only was he gorgeous, but he also looked really pretty next to Chapel despite being a vanilla horse. Of course, I would turn him into a swem horse at some point, but I really wanted to continue with my first ride, so I hopped back on and stopped by the storage shed where I gave Chapel all the XP potions I had been saving. Wanting some excitement, I extended cantered up the hill behind my house and she still did not buck or rear at all. We flew around the side of the mountain where I was briefly distracted by collecting cherry blossom leaves. Continuing on, I saw another bee, which did remind me that I wanted to get a few at some point. I figured that despite my trouble with bees on the original 100 Days Horse Edition, maybe my eco-friendly actions would make them like me this time. We trotted through a cherry blossom grove and it was so pretty here. I could not have asked for a better spot to have settled down, especially since it had such gorgeous trails to ride. I did stop in a clearing where I pranced around collecting flowers until dark. Feeling Chapel had been out long enough, we went home, where she promptly lay down and slept right next to Marshmallow. So cute. After putting her tack away, I felt like it would be nice to have a pond, so I dug one out next to the shed. Day 22, my pond was filled with water and I planted a few sugarcane for convenience. The view from the pond was lush and I was looking forward to sitting down and fishing in this spot. I crafted a few desensitization items for the horses. It was never too early to start, so I headed to the paddock and used the hula hoop on Chapel. Oh, and I did make her a pretty western halter, which is what she's wearing, but the brown kind of blends into her face, so that's what you're seeing if you were wondering. She did really well for her first session, but at some point I did want to build a round pen to do the training in. Finally, I framed the brush and hula hoop on the wall so that I could easily access them whenever I needed. The white horse and Marshmallow were getting on well, and Chapel was happily munching on the grass. I spent some time crafting decor for the tack and feed room for the rest of the night. Day 23, I set about decorating the tack room. Keeping the cutesy vibes, I opted for pink countertops to act as a feed mixing station and a sink to match. I really wanted a shelf because there was so much dead space above the window, and at first I used full blocks, which looks so bulky, but then I switched it out for some slabs which looked so much better. I had also put up saddle and bridle racks as well as a hanging rack for pasture blankets. I was then back in the crafting bench making some hay nets, which I placed on chains inside the horse's shelter. I also added a few grain feeders, and now it had everything they would need to live a full and happy life with free choice stabling. For my final project of the day, I wanted to make a wash stall, so I grabbed my granite and dug out the floor outside the tack room, placing a hitching ring in the middle and 2 web guards at the side. Voila! Basic wash stall. Day 24, I added the final details of a bucket for water and a cooler, which I've always thought looks like a tack box. I was very pleased with my simple but effective design. Now that I had a swem horse, I had to get into a routine where I poo pick the field and make sure everyone is happy. Then I chose to finally finish decorating the roof of my house using various flowers and vines to give it colour and make it look pretty and natural. I went a step further and added leaves to make it seem overgrown and even more hobbity. This was quite tricky considering how high up I was, and when I was finally finished, it was dark. I had done the same with the storage shed roof, and I was definitely a fan of how cottagecore and cutesy everything was looking. To finish off the night, I added some of my remaining leaves to the stable roof to try and help it blend a little bit better without being too much. Day 25, I kept myself busy by landscaping near my house so that I could fit a round pen between it and the stables. Now, my round pens aren't exactly the prettiest, nor the roundest, but after some dubious measuring, I was supposed to start building, but got distracted by the fact that it was raining and Chapel was naked, so I went in and crafted her a pretty mint pasture blanket, and made sure she was all snuggled and warm inside the shelter. It even had this uber cute heart on the side of it. Oh, I'm so pleased with how on brand this challenge turned out. We haven't even gotten to the really good stuff yet. On the morning of day 26, I was actually inside my empty house so that I could go up on the balcony and show you how pretty my round pen is. Sure, it was more diagonal than round per se, but I loved how the posts were oak, which was the same on all the other buildings, and the leaves really added a touch of nature. From here, I could see Chapel was hanging out, so I went and grabbed her so that she could be the first to try out the new round pen. It didn't even have a gate yet, so I had to leave her tied up. I gave her a lovely thorough brush before using the hula hoop, and although she really didn't like it, she took it like a champ. Satisfied with the round pen and Chapel's performance, I turned her back out and made sure to hang up her rug in the tack room, which was looking a tad bit empty at the moment. Then it was back to crafting, clearing a bunch of land, and starting a little farm under what would end up being my kitchen window. I used the swem fences and chopped them down so it was just a cute little border fence. Day 27 started with me putting in some paths so that the place looked a little more put together. I went with my classic combo of dirt path, granite, cobblestone, and stone buttons for texture and depth. I was really liking how it was all looking, but then decided to muck it up by making a little fountain. But fountains are impossible when you have a 4x4 area that isn't even centered. Yes, as you can see, such a flop. I was so disappointed because this wasn't even the first time I tried to do a mini fountain that had turned out rubbish. To make myself feel better, I towered up to get a view of my property so far, and despite the sad dirt patch that had appeared in front of the stables, I think it was looking really lovely. During the night, I went about crafting more decor items to really cutify the place. Day 28 had a beautiful sunrise, and I got to work hanging up some flower pots around the stables and added a few to my house too. I ended up going all out and added glowberry vines to my porch and a bunch of flower pots to my windowsills. I also started smelting some more glass because I finally wanted to build my greenhouse. During the night, I started outlining the wall, and well, in the daylight of day 29, I realized it was ugly. Horrible palette, bad design, and the worst part is, this was the only build I've done so far that didn't follow a tutorial, apart from the stables, but I'm a horse girl, I have to build nice stables. A little bit frustrated, I chose to unwind by giving Chapel a quick brush in the paddock and admiring the actually decent job I had done building and decorating the stables. I found the white horse staring out beyond the fence towards the mountain. I couldn't help but wonder, did he miss his freedom? Had I taken too much from Mother Nature after she gifted me Chapel? Did I get too greedy? I suppose I would find out. I finally buckled down and found myself a nice tutorial for the greenhouse. This time, it was a TikTok by Arashai12_, and I really liked the size and shape of it, so off I went putting the whole thing together. Day 30, I had most of it done, and I adored how it was turning out. It was far better than whatever my first attempt was. The way the sun came through the glass was so warm and comforting, plus it made really pretty shadows on the ground. Day 31, I was adding some raised garden beds and cute plant-themed clutter items. I added tables because I feel like you need space to repot plants and trim branches. I don't know. I have a pretty bad black thumb in real life. I can kill almost any plant within a matter of days. I surrounded the raised beds in acacia trapdoors because they did look like flower bed siding, and also added lanterns to the ceiling so that I could see in the night. Day 32, I added a sign that read Pinehaven's greenhouse, and because I was on a roll, I cleared a hefty plot of land for a wheat field. In the pouring rain, I plopped some leaves down as a rough border, and in the light of day 33, hoed all the ground and planted my seeds. Not quite done with the farming elements, I made a little garden plot right next to the greenhouse for things I wanted to grow in moderation, as the main wheat field was pretty big. To finish up, I planted oat seeds and bordered the plot with low swem fences. Day 34, I was adding the finishing touches to the greenhouse exterior, which was looking uber cute, but I was feeling a little stir crazy from being at home so much. I thought it would be a lovely idea to grab Chapel's Tack and go for a little adventure. I had her hitched outside the tack room for convenience, and she stood super quietly while I tacked her up for a second time ever. We headed towards the forest where I had the butterfly encounter, and we held a nice steady canter most of the way through. I found a pretty steep bank that was actually caused by the river which I'd boated down a few weeks ago. Now, I will apologise for this next bit because riding a swem horse through the forest is such a headache, literally, because they're so tall and bulky. Instead of fighting my way through leaves, I found that running across treetops was far easier navigating the forest, but it is absolutely not very realistic. After making my way decently far, I stopped periodically to pick patches of wildflowers within the woods. This continued well into darkness when suddenly a bee approached me. It seemed entranced by me, buzzing so closely that I wondered, was this another butterfly experience? Was this Mother Nature trying to communicate with me again? Was I the chosen— oh, wait a minute, I'm holding a flower in my hand. Okay, maybe that one butterfly experience had made me far too whimsical, but you can't fault a girl for trying to be one with the forest, especially when she looks like the Hobbit, allegedly. I did find this gorgeous savannah village whose style was clearly Asian inspired. It was really cool to go inside and explore all the different structures. I even found myself inside what looked like a restaurant, where I cooked myself some mutton chops and sat at a table by myself in an empty room. Day 35, I made sure to give Chapel a nice big drink of water despite the rain because we had been adventuring for over a day now, pressing on through the oak woods and into the pine forest, where I had to dismount and lead her because the leaves were too low and the path too narrow. Do you see what I mean about swem horses and forests now? Day 36, I had found a flower forest, and as you can imagine, I had a field day collecting all the different tulips and orchids. Personally, my favorite flower is the pink tulip, and it would look amazing in my house. After exerting myself with frolicking, I started for home, where I spontaneously decided to abduct 2 bees. These poor guys were just minding their own business, but I promise they can go right back to their home once they give me little baby bees for my greenhouse. Also, I ended up grabbing 2 more bees on my way back. I couldn't help myself, they were right there. So with 4 bees in tow, I got home and bred them so that I could keep the little ones. In hindsight, that sounds really weird, but I promise this is the most eco-friendly way of doing this. While inside the greenhouse, I also added lilac to my trellises and popped some flowers in my planters for the bees to pollinate. Finally, at 4 in the morning on day 37, I untacked Chapel, who plopped down as soon as her bridle was off to try and get a few hours of sleep before it got too light. Today, I decided to add a splash of pink to the property by growing a cherry blossom tree right outside the stables. I had to redo it a few times because the tree either came out too small or I didn't like the shape, but eventually I got this tall, lush blossom tree which I adored. Not quite done with the pink theme, I also tried growing one in the paddock, but that took a few attempts to get right too. I finally got what I was looking for, but it was dark at this point, so just wait until you see it in the daylight. Day 38, I had decorated the main tree with glowberry vines, spore blossoms, and icicle fairy lights, so it was looking gorgeously dreamy. Here's what the 2 trees look like from my balcony, and I promise that's not even the best bit, because my render distance was a tad too low, but when you see what it looks like with the mountain in the back, you're gonna be blown away. This was also a very very important day because I was finally ready to turn the white horse into a swem horse. I opted to utilize the round pen to avoid Marshmallow and Chapel being kicked. Say goodbye to tiny little vanilla horse and hello to big beautiful swem steed. As pretty as this Palomino is, I did want to change it to reflect the original coat. By the time I had found what I was looking for, it was dark, raining, and he was trying to sleep. I once again asked you guys for name suggestions and quite a few people suggested Prince, and I thought that certainly suited this royal chap. I wasted no time in making his tack. I had assigned him the colour lilac as it would go well with Chapel's mint and his white coat could pull off any colour. Here he is in the full fit on day 39. This time I went with a western set just to spice things up a bit. Since he was standing so nicely despite the rain, I thought I would try having a little sit on him. We had a lovely bouncy trot around the round pen and even tried out a short canter. Also, this is him in the fly mask. How adorable is that? Soon it stopped raining and I brought Prince back into the pasture to reunite with Chapel and Marshmallow. Oh my goodness, look how pretty he is with the mountain and the tree and the falling leaves and oh my gosh. Anyway, I popped a lilac western halter on him and set up his own tack station in the tack room. I ended up switching the halters out for fly masks and hanging them up outside the stables. I also went in and added a few more pastel buckets on the shelf in the tack and feed room. How adorable is that looking? Also, I put away all of Prince's tack and hung up the lilac blanket that I had just crafted for him. In the mood for some light decorating, I put in 2 pink feed bins, which eventually I would put grain in, and filled an empty corner at the back of the room with hay bales and a few feeders sprinkled about for a touch of colour. The tack and feed room was still a little dark, but with all the new bits of decor in, it was starting to come together. To finish the day off, I went into the paddock where Chapel and Marshmallow were walking together and I made sure all the water troughs were filled. At night I could see how stunning the main cherry blossom tree looked with the vines and the fairy lights. I'd actually swapped out the cherry logs for oak ones since they felt better with the bill palette. Day 40, my goal was to tack up Chapel and head out into the meadow between my plot and the village to try and clear it up a bit. I wanted to fill in any cracks or holes and just generally make the area flatter and safer to ride on. There was this lovely big single block divot in the middle of the meadow that I sort of wanted to fill with water to create a small pond that could be ridden through. I didn't have buckets to flood this area just yet, so it would give me time to think about it. Day 41, I made myself a set of pretty blue gates for the round pen and they brought such a lovely pop of colour. I finally put in a front door on my house and I had surrounded it with glass panes to let a lot of natural light in. I did build a sheep pasture outside the back door of my house so that those poor guys finally had their own little space. I really didn't want too many as mass farming animal products is not exactly cottagecore and I wanted these sheep to be kept as family members rather than passing livestock. I made sure to put in a spigot and water bucket for them, even though I know Minecraft sheep don't actually need it. By this point, I had decided on going ahead with the flood, and out I went with Chapel to get water for the project. It took me quite a while to get everything wet, since the area was pretty big, but when I was done at sunset, I had a lovely, shallow, shimmery lake to ride through. Now that I had this great big space, I figured I could plop down a few cross-country jumps to train the horses on. Day 42, I started making a little course to ride, and most of the jumps were only 1 or 2 blocks high, since neither equines had actually done any jumping yet. I also added a water obstacle, which started just as a floating pole in the lake. I needed to check the swim horses would actually jump out of the water, and for that I needed Chapel to have her first go on some of the obstacles. Her first ever jump was an orange roll top, and I was thrilled that she soared over it like it was nothing. She even hopped over the oak log with ease, so I thought I might as well give the lake pole a go. I gave her a nice long run up, into the water she went with no issue, and popped over the pole beautifully. I did try and get her to jump the log again, but I didn't get my striding right, so she refused, which was my fault, not hers. I quickly cleared a small mound that was bothering me, and placed down a few more obstacles. Day 43, I used used my shovel to create paths between the jumps to help me navigate the course and make it look used and like it's been ridden on a lot. I mounted Chapel for a morning course ride, and whilst she did take a few decent jumps really well, she did refuse quite a few too. Either she wasn't in the best mood or was just tired from yesterday, so I opted to give her a break and instead use my wash stall to give her a brush and untack her before the rain started. She was happy to be back with her friends, and I made sure to rug both of the horses to keep them dry, and Prince even decided to snuggle up and groom Chapel. I spent the majority of the rest of the day crafting a ton of decor items so I could finally furnish and move into my house. Day 44, I started with the kitchen. I had picked out some lovely mint green countertops and a pink retro fridge which actually had storage. Then I added a little stone oven which has some sort of hood slash chimney over it. Not very real, but still cute. And next to that, I put a modern stove, making that my cooking station. I wrapped the counters around to bring it all together and decorated it to look more cluttered. My favorite bits was using the icicle fairy lights because they look like onion bulbs, and the little muffin on a plate. I also hung up some pots from the ceiling to utilize the empty space above the counters. I put in a few more bits and bobs, including these skinny cabinets above the cooking station. This was certainly a cottagecore kitchen, and I love the way it's all cluttered but still gives a homely vibe. Day 45, I moved on to the living room area, and there really was not a lot of space, so I had to think small. I used the gap under the stairs to create a book nook, complete with an overhead moonlight, Polaroids, and a lily of the valley. In the middle of the room, I had a diagonal moss carpet which was bringing the gnome vibes, as well as a plush pink sofa up against the corner. Then I had a pink table, sport a pile of books, and another plant pot, and to tie it all together I had various pretty paintings, bunting, and hanging flower pots. So this is what the downstairs looks like. It's certainly cute while not feeling claustrophobic. Feeling emboldened by my success, I moved onto the upstairs and immediately put a banister in. I did get distracted by this gorgeous view that I had from my balcony. I mean, just, oh, look at it. The room was a bit awkward size-wise. At first, I put my bed on the other side of the room near the stairs, but it just felt so wrong. So I shuffled everything around and ended up putting the bed by the balcony door, so I had the rest of the room to play with. While I was putting in some paintings, I discovered this monstrosity. What is it? Why is it buff? What mod or texture pack put this in my game? Anyway, it's day 48 now, and I'm ready to give you a full house tour. As you can see, the outside is overgrown, hobbity, and whimsical, and look, my carrots wiggle like jelly. Here's my porch, which doesn't have much function besides looking nice, and when you go through the front door, you walk into the living room, which I have already showed you, and to your right is the kitchen, which is genuinely my favorite bit in the house. Going upstairs, you have the master bedroom, which has big, beautiful windows and a killer view. In here, we have another moss carpet, some hanging plants, a painting of a white horse, which I decided was Prince. It also had a cute table that had a bee plush on it, some saddles to really tie in the horse girl theme, and a desk for all of my journaling. With quite a lot of time spent crafting and decorating, I desperately wanted to go for a ride, so I brought both horses out and took off their rugs, gave them a good brush, and waved a pom-pom around for desensitization. My mount of choice today was Chapel, so I tacked her up but didn't include her leg wraps and ear bonnets as I wasn't planning to do any jumping. Before I left, I filled up the troughs and put Prince back in the paddock. Then I hopped on Chapel and we walked towards the meadow, and it started raining. It literally was raining on my parade today. Instead, I binned off the ride and ended up just going to sleep. Day 49, it was still raining in the morning, so I planted some pumpkins next to the storage shed. It cleared up pretty soon after, so I wasted no time grabbing Prince and getting him ready for the ride. I decided to not be lazy and use the wash stall for grooming and tacking him up, which he stood beautifully for. Then I hopped on and we were off. I did start off slow, but Prince had a few moments where he reared up at just the trot, and then later at the canter too. He was proving to be more hard work than Chapel, but I was more than prepared to give him the time he needed to adjust. Not wanting to just do the same gait changing over and over, I thought it would be a nice idea to have a canter down to the beach where his old herd was. Here they were lazily wandering around, living their best life, and I wondered if they recognized Prince. Did they miss him? Did he miss them? I could only wonder, and with that, I found Prince was much happier steadily cantering than doing exercises in the meadow, so I figured it would be nice to go on a little adventure with him so I could get to know him a little better. We cantered along the beach and around the curve of the shore. We hit a snowy biome where the soft rolling hills made me want to extended canter, so I asked him, and Prince obliged. He had a lovely long stride and we just flew over the frozen plains. We came across a village which I hadn't visited before, and here I saw some cats, one in particular that was participating in orange cat behavior by jumping around frantically. That did remind me I wanted to get a cat, as I have to be honest here, cottagecore, to me at least, is a cat lady theme. I did want a dog too, but fairies and hobbits and cozy just gave me cat vibes. I trotted around the pen in the center where I saw the cutest little blue roan. Guys, when I tell you I had to resist the very strong urge to not steal this little button, oh my goodness, I wanted to take them home with me so badly. But no, I had to be a good person and not just take other people's horses. I milled around the village until sunset and decided to camp out here for the night. Day 50, I woke up with adventure still coursing through my veins, so we took off shortly after dawn, only to stop immediately when I saw powdered snow. Wanting to check that I was right, I stood on top of it, and yep, that's gonna try and kill me. I opted instead to go the other way around the mountain. A meadow that was in the shadow of the cliffs had what I thought was 2 horses. Then I quickly discovered that a mare and foal were hiding in a cave. I assumed the stallion thought I was threatening as he jumped down to put himself between me and the baby. Whilst horses aren't usually cave-dwelling, I can't blame them for taking shelter. Leaving the herd alone, I realised a pool of lava was starting to set the dense forest alight, so I had to act quickly, pulling out my bucket and solidifying the pool. Man, that's the second time in this challenge alone that I've had to save something from a pond of lava. Turning around, my breath was taken away by the view of the snow-capped mountain, giving way to the flowery meadow where Prince was standing. How stunning is that? Deciding I had stared long enough, we took off again, this time running into a snowy spruce forest. I was sort of hoping to run into some wolves, but instead found a bunch of crows. Emerging from the forest, I saw an ice spikes biome. This was a very rare type of biome, and I hadn't seen one before, so I had to go and look. Arriving at sea level, I spotted a shipwreck and saw my first ever seal. This dude is so cute. Look at his silly little face. Exploring the wreck, I could not believe I found 5 diamond plates, which I could convert into raw diamond. I basically cheated the system. I wouldn't even need to go mining now. What a lucky find. Anyway, my themed Minecraft skin was finally ready and ta-da! It's so cute. I've got like this pink ombre dress on with some cute booties. I really love the sleeves too. I commissioned this skin and many others from in-app store on Fiverr, linked below. After making sure the wreck had no more loot in it, I bimbled around the ice just seeing the sights, and when it was dark, I realized the glow butterfly was here. Not just one, but lots everywhere, all over the ice. I did a little research and it turns out these were ice butterflies, surprise, surprise, and the one I had seen in my forest had probably flown down from the peak behind my house. For a moment, I considered catching one, but that felt wrong. They deserve to be free here and not used like decoration in my home. Cantering over snowy plains, there were many, many ice butterflies, and I felt very lucky to see them out in the wild. Day 51, I arrived back just before 6 AM and I got to get a really good look at my property with fresh eyes. It was really shaping up how I wanted it to. I can't lie, I was nervous to do this challenge because if things didn't turn out the way I wanted to, it would have been so disappointing. But with the help of tutorials, especially Croissant Cat, and a touch of confidence, it was turning out great. Prince got groomed and untacked and then let out into the paddock. The horses were looking really happy, so I was super pleased. Also, here is a better look at the skin with the flowery tool, flower crown armor, and a cherry blossom tree in the back. You can't tell me I'm not slaying this challenge right now. Do people still say that? I organized my crates and chests for the rest of the day, and in the evening I plopped down a yellow hammock behind the main tree so that I could sleep in the sunshine on slow days. Day 52, I finally added some lighting in the tack and feed room so I could see. Plus, I always love including a tack cleaning station, which is usually just some tables, chairs, and a bucket. I just find it adds some life to the room that is kind of easy to forget about. I also put in a bunch of fruit and veg crates to act as treat storage. The wood was a little bit dark compared to everything else, but I love the fact that you could actually put food in the crates. This is how the tack room is looking right now, and it's pretty darn swanky. Now, I know I said I was going to get a cat first, but I will admit I took a ride out to look for wolves. I found myself climbing an incredibly sheer stony mountain, but at the top I had a spectacular view. Here I could get my bearings to see if I could find a biome or interesting landmark to go towards, but nothing of real importance caught my eye. Instead, Chapel and I basked in the warm glow of sunset and admired the area. Day 53, on my way home, I spontaneously decided I wanted to abduct a random blue jay from the forest. I wouldn't put him in a cage, I just wanted to move him near my property to bring up the birdie vibe. I also grabbed a few hummingbirds too. I'm a bird napper. After depositing my feathered friends in the greenhouse, mind you, the doors are open so they can leave if they want, I took Chapel out for a little jump session. It was a super nice course to ride, and we did have a few refusals that were mostly due to my bad striding, but I was very pleased we managed to complete the triple. It had proved to be quite tricky, but once Chapel had her stride, she was flying over the course. To finish up, we sped over the snowy hills and visited the neighbouring village again. Here I watched a grey cat stalking a butterfly, which I found adorable, until I promptly realised the cat was not playing and ate the butterfly. Murderer! I ended up having to do some horse wrangling when the mama and baby blue roan that we saw a couple days ago had escaped their paddock. I'm not sure how they got out, but I safely returned them like a good citizen. Day 54, I started early looking for some chickens. I was poking around the first village I had landed at when I saw a soft glow in the distance. Another ice butterfly. I was sure now it had flown down from the mountain, but just like the first time, it flitted into the trees, and I almost didn't follow it, thinking there was no way it was going to lead me somewhere again, right? I couldn't help myself. This time, atop the horse that the ice butterfly had led me to, I followed it into the cherry grove. It stopped further down the mountain and didn't move, so I thought perhaps it was pointing me in a direction. I ran around all morning looking for something, and finally giving up, I went back to find the butterfly. I could not believe my eyes that standing in the cherry forest was none other than a chicken. 2 chickens, 3, 4. This might have been a coincidence, but you know what? I'm choosing to believe that the ice butterfly had graced me again. I hauled the chickens home and used the sheep paddock as a temporary hold for them. I trotted up to the stables in the rain when a hummingbird greeted me, and I did feel a tad like Snow White in that moment. I think it was enjoying the great big cherry blossom tree in the middle, and I was glad the wildlife was happy here. I made sure to grab both rugs when I was putting away Chapel's tack, and just as I was getting ready to throw one over Prince, the weather cleared up like magic. It really felt like the UK over here. Day 55, I thought to myself, you know what this place needs? A baby horse. I had always planned to breed Prince and Chapel since they were opposite genders, but what better time than now? Her pregnancy would last approximately 10 days, and that would give me plenty of time to bond and train the foal, and I would even ride them when they became old enough. I brought out all the ingredients to make sweet feed and then mixed it in with some roses to turn it into the perfect aphrodisiac. I fed Chapel some first and then Prince, and just like that, the foal was on its way. I was excited and nervous for their arrival, and I wanted things to be in tip-top shape. I bred the chickens just to plump up the numbers and decided my next project would have to be a coop. There was an empty space across from the storage shed, and yes, I was going to freehand this, no tutorial. I figured it's a coop, how wrong can I go? Unfortunately for you, that actually wasn't foreshadowing because I did pretty well. Using the same palette I had done everywhere else, I just made sure that it was even and had a really low roof so it didn't obscure anything. I worked on it all through the night and put the chickens chickens inside as soon as it was done. Day 56, I wanted to take Prince out for a ride, but instead of just throwing his tack on and going, I wanted to savor the process. I had been such a busy bee this entire time that I felt like it was super important for me to slow down, enjoy all the details, and appreciate just how far we had come already. I personally think cottagecore is on like the opposite side of the spectrum to grind and hustle culture, which means it was more than just an aesthetic, it was a mindset. Okay, now I sound like an Alpha Bro podcaster, but you get what I mean. I tacked him up and enjoyed the chirping of the birds, then led him over to the round pen where I desensitized using a blue tarp. Then we did a short warm-up of just walking, and instead of cantering over to the meadow, I decided to walk all the way over there. I stopped briefly to collect eggs, and you can kind of see how cute the coupe turned out. Proceeding to the meadow, we geared up to a canter to get him nice and loose, and then tried popping over a few of the jumps, but he still wasn't overly confident, so we kept it small. He was getting a lot better though. I just think Chapel enjoyed the jumping more than he did. Apart from a few refusals, we went really nicely around the course. At sunset, we were finished with a full day of training under our belt. I made sure to put his tack away neatly before turning him out into the paddock. I spent a bit of time admiring the tack room, which was now almost completely how I wanted it to look. But then again, the glow from the sunset could have made a pile of rubbish look beautiful. Now I had eggs, I could craft some sweet feed for the ponies, which I was pretty chuffed about. With no big projects in mind, I actually went home for the first time in ages and slept in my own bed. Day 57, I gave the horses breakfast and I think they quite enjoyed it. Marshmallow came up to say hi, which I appreciated, and then I got on with crafting some poles and cones. I figured that if Prince was more keen on western riding, it was only fair that I put up some courses that he would enjoy. This included a barrel racing circuit and some pole bending. Day 58 and 59, I was working hard at extending the cross-country course to be a little bit more dynamic and challenging. Day 60, Prince was back out in the meadow with me and I showed him the new cones so that he wouldn't be spooked. I started off really easy by walking the pattern, and when he felt confident, we did it in a trot too. I wanted to try and train him to naturally go faster on the home straight, but Prince wasn't a fan when I asked for the canter. He popped over a few poles and I showed him some of the layout of the new course. In the afternoon, we did hill work for endurance training, and I think he really enjoyed that. Not wanting to overexert him, we finished up, and soon after that, it did rain, so I made sure to rug both of the horses. Day 61, I crafted a pickaxe, and I realized I had just enough diamonds left to make an enchantment table. I went to the insurance fraud house to collect obsidian with my new pick. I really wanted to enchant my fishing rod, as I hadn't done any real fishing yet. I thought an enchanting room would be cool, but I didn't want to build a whole new shed for it, so instead I carved out a space under the existing storage building. I replaced all the walls with granite and spent day 62 decorating it. I went with a more witchy theme in here because I felt like it. I could have gone with a more cottagecore and natural direction, but I guess when I think of enchanting, I think dark magic. I did not have enough XP levels for getting the enchantment I wanted, and I didn't feel like slaughtering a bunch of animals for levels, so instead I peacefully fished. This would take me a really long time. Prowling in the grass, a cat had come over from the village. I was in the middle of casting my rod, so once I had something hooked, I tempted it over with some raw fish. It cautiously stalked towards me, and I waited for it to get as close as it wanted before feeding it right from my hand. I had successfully tamed a cat, and it looked very much like a Siamese, if you please. She was super cute, and I went and got pink dye for her collar. I had some errands to do, and she followed me into the pasture, curious to see what I was doing. I decided to name her Clover, as it was cottagecore and suited the way she looked. Day 63, I did some morning fishing, and I was up to level 25 now, only 5 levels from 30, which is what I needed to enchant my rod. I spent some time in my kitchen preparing the fish I had freshly caught. I did some more fishing at sundown, then decided to go down to the river to see if I could put some aquatic life in buckets for my pond. Now, instead of being a sensible person and just walking down the cliff, I thought to myself, I could probably jump into the water from this high up. I gave myself a proper run and Not even close. Nowhere near. Don't even know why I tried it. And the cherry on top, I lost all my levels. Yup, 25 down to 7. My dreams of owning an enchanted rod died that day. Day 64, I went out with Prince in search of pond decor, but I didn't want to go too far because if you remember, it was 10 days ago that Chapel became pregnant and she was due any day now. Day 65, my pond was looking full of life. I had fishies, a lobster, and an axolotl that I had named Lemon Sorbet, which is my favorite type of ice cream. While waiting for the baby, I made a path between the village and my house, purely just for aesthetics. Day 66, I found a feather on my porch next to an innocent-looking clover. Now, I'm not accusing her of killing a bird, but she definitely killed a bird. After using a vet kit to see where Chapel's pregnancy was at, I realized she wasn't as far along as I thought, so I had a good opportunity to take Prince out on an adventure. We rode very far out, and I took in the beautiful terrain generation, biomes, and wildlife. As the sun started to set, Prince and I were cantering into the open plains when an outpost caught my eye. There were no pillagers here anymore, but upon further inspection, there were so many poor creatures trapped in cages, including iron golems and allays. In the dark, I worked to free them all, and once I had, I realized they were a little lost. These guys had no purpose out here, and the iron golems especially were vulnerable. I rounded them all up on foot so that I could bring them home with me. I slept in my sleeping bag, making it day 67, and made sure everyone was on a lead when I realized Prince was nowhere to be found. I looked far and wide for him, starting to panic as the day went on. That's impossible, right? There's no way this horse disappeared like Rocky did in the first 100 days. He didn't fall in a hole and get trapped or worse, right? I climbed up the villager tower to get a clearer view and nothing. He was a white horse wearing purple tack, for goodness sake. It wasn't like he was camouflaged. I pillared up again, this time even higher, but still no sign of this horse. Now I was really panicking. I checked every crevasse, hole, and cave I could find just in case he had fallen or wandered inside. I combed the beach, checking everywhere I thought he could possibly be. I was just about ready to give up. It was dark, I was far from home, but I gave it one last chance and started searching the woods. In the pitch black, a fat white butt stuck out from under the leaves. This absolute sausage had wandered half a mile across the plains and into the woods, practically giving me a heart attack. If this was his attempt at escaping, he gave me a pretty good run for my money. Not wanting to spend any more time away from home, I gathered everyone up and hopped on Prince, starting the long road back. Day 68, we were chugging along in a river. Out of nowhere, a whale tosses one of the golems into the air, and I panicked, knowing I couldn't make Prince swim any faster. Luckily, we had crossed into shallower water, and even though I could tell the whale wanted both golems gone, it couldn't follow suit. Dragging everyone through water and skidding across ice, then struggling up the hill, we arrived home under the cover of darkness. I didn't have a place to keep any of the allays or golems, so I just let them go, free to roam across the property and even out of it if they wished. Day 69, I tended to the horses and bought a single sea pickle from a wandering trader. I potted around adding flowers everywhere and doing some gardening. Nothing too exciting, mostly because if my calculations were right, Chapel would give birth tomorrow. I was super keen on finding out the gender of the baby, what color it would be, and there was a very slim possibility of twins, but I wouldn't hold my breath. Day 70, while I was out in the paddock on foaling watch, it started to bucket down, and I wanted to get Chapel under the shelter, and literally as I was leading her, she gave birth to a blue-eyed little white angel. They were the cutest little button and were up on their feet immediately, and shortly after they were suckling for mama. I pulled out my vet bag just to check everything was okay and healthy, and I found out Chapel had had a beautiful baby girl. A spitting image of her dad for now. I knew she would most likely grow into a different coat, but it would likely be something quite light. Clover was in the paddock checking checking out the newcomer, but one equine didn't seem very interested. Marshmallow stood in the pouring rain, staring at the foal. I think he wasn't sure what to make of her, and was maybe even starting to think the place was becoming a little crowded. The baby wasn't shy at all, whinnying and nickering at Marshmallow from her mother's side. I stuck around for a bit to make sure everyone was getting on, and once I was sure the baby was happy, I left the parents to bond with their foal. Not wanting to wander too far, I plopped my backpack next to the bench and spent the remainder of the day fishing. In the morning of day 71, I could see the horses still huddled under the shelter, and I did realize I may have gone a bit crazy with the flowers behind the coop, but that's okay. Since the weather was lovely today and the new baby girl was a confident little thing, I led Chapel out of the paddock and she followed suit. We took our time and slowly made our way towards the round pen. The baby's little legs were wobbly and she took her time finding her footing across the path. Once they were both inside, I hitched Chapel to one of the posts and grabbed a pom-pom and some apples for treats. I gave both Mama and Baby a really thorough groom and then waved the pom-pom around a little bit and ended the session there. I needed to start slow and small so I didn't overwhelm either of them, and we could continue handling and desensitization tomorrow. I crammed in a really short cross-country session with Prince just before the end of the day. Day 72, I realized Chapel hadn't been out on a ride since she became pregnant, and the poor girl was probably feeling a bit stir-crazy. Plus, the baby would have Dad to watch over her, so it's not like they would be by themselves. After grabbing her and tacking her up, I could see the baby was right by her dad's side, and it did break my heart just a little when she came up to the gate to watch her mum go. Chapel was a firecracker on the course, and I could tell she had been wanting to stretch her legs and have fun. She warmed up beautifully and finally got to try out the pole bending as it got put in after she was pregnant. She popped over the orange roll top, and after that, I let her loose. So instead of following the course around, we galloped up the hill and behind the house. It must have been wonderful for her to put some speed on and feel the wind in her hair. I was less riding her and more just a passenger, simply guiding her speed and power in my direction of choice. Since we were just flying around, I thought we could give the triple a go and see if we could get the striding right. All I had to do was line her up, and she took us over the whole thing like she'd been doing it her whole life, soaring over the big jump at the end. We spent the entire rest of the day letting Chapel take any obstacle she wanted, and I could tell she was hungry for the exercise. There was literally nothing she balked at. I even tried her out on the new drop jumps. She overjumped the ditch by a mile and barely hopped the wall, but I think she had fun. When the sun started to set, we returned home, where her baby was waiting for her at the gate. Chapel clearly needed the time to let loose, but she was also happy to be back with her daughter. It was dark when I finally let her out into the paddock, and I think everyone in there was happy to see her. Day 73, we were back in the round pen doing desensitization training, grooming, and feeding treats. These sessions were a great opportunity for the foal to explore the property a little bit, as well as get to know and trust me. Once I was done with the horses, I planted some big trees behind the round pen in an attempt to create a more foresty backdrop. At the moment, the property was feeling a bit open, and I hoped the shrubbery would help it seem more protected. Day 74, I was still tinkering in my faux forest, and day 75, I watched Prince mill around the paddock from my balcony and had a look around the property to see if everything was still looking how I wanted. I walked into the paddock like I normally do and found Marshmallow pressed up against the fence, staring out to the mountain. I felt very sad for him. He was clearly unhappy and longing for the freedom of open plains. Chapel spotted me and sauntered over, bringing with her her bouncing, excitable daughter. I figured out that since Marshmallow was by himself with the buffalo, he clearly didn't like how crowded it was in here with 3 horses. I gave myself some time to think about this problem, keeping my hands busy with growing some more trees. Day 76, I upgraded the sheep paddock fencing and pillared up to show you how things were looking. I had started adding a low hedge fence facing the village to close us off a little more, and added a bigger pond by the entrance. Everything was looking fan-dabby-dozy. I really had managed to pick the perfect location for this property. Everything everything fit super well without feeling massively spaced out. Day 77, I tended to the horses and deepened the pond so it could hold some fish. Day 78, I could just about see Marshmallow, who was still pressed up against the fence facing the mountain. I had two potential plans to help him, but I had to age up the foal first, so I brought her and Chapel into the round pen where I gave her a final baby brush and top wave before feeding her a rose feed scoop, which instantly aged her into an adult. She was a stunning flaxen chestnut Tobiano, and she was the epitome of pretty princess mixed in with cottagecore. I pulled Chapel out of the pen and put her back in the paddock and then ran to the storage shed to get a name tag. This one was all me, as the name Carmela popped into my head as soon as I saw her. Jumping on the crafting table, I got to work creating her tack set, and without even checking, I had assigned her the color rose. Now, I know it's dark here, but this is the full set. I had gone with a cloth bridle, English saddle, and breast collar. She looked absolutely darling. Day 79, I put all her tack, including a rose-coloured rug, away and brought her into the main paddock where she ate breakfast. Today we would have our first ride, so I popped on her new kit and she did a little shake after I was done. Here I am riding her, and I can't lie, I think her coat suited the Cottagecore challenge the best. Don't get me wrong, I love Chapel and Prince, but I just think her colour and pattern was so pretty. Today it was about taking it nice and slowly, not rushing anything, just introducing my weight to her back and showing her around the course. Day 80 through 84, we focused on building her confidence and muscle, changing things up with the occasional trail ride to teach her good footing. Day 85, I really tried soaking in the cottagecore life. I noticed the sunlight streaming in through my bedroom window, and I looked out into the pasture to see my horses milling about. Walking out of my front door, I collected the fully grown potatoes and sauntered over to the coop to collect my eggs. It did begin raining, but that's okay, because the water would be good for the plants. I took shelter in my greenhouse where I did some gardening, and then took the time to try and sort out my very messy inventory and throw out anything I didn't need. I started my chores and filled up water troughs, brushing Prince as I went by. I decided I would briefly try something as I found Marshmallow still sulking by the fence. I simply removed it. He could go. If he wanted to leave, I would let him. I wouldn't try to stop him or bring him back. I was prepared to give him that choice, and maybe, all along, that choice was all he wanted. Making a very clear point, he walked away from the fence and towards the shelter, so I got the message. He might have just wanted to have been seen, and I hope I managed to show him that I did care. After patching up the fence, I grabbed all three rugs and threw them on their respective horses. The pastel colours all together in the paddock were looking very aesthetic. To end my day, I fished under the cover of a tree. Day 86, I saddled up Chapel and went to the nearby river to catch some fish for my pond. I didn't have many buckets, so I had to be selective, picking up a blue lobster and 2 terrapins. Day 87, I thought that, well, since we had under 2 weeks left, I might as well use it to breed again. Who can say no to a new baby? I removed Carmela from the paddock and fed them some more rose feed. Very shortly, Chapel was pregnant again, and while we didn't have a huge amount of time left, I was very excited to meet our new family member. I went out to the pond by the entrance of the property and released my lobster and terrapins. Turns out, love must have been in the air today, as the 2 terrapins bred right on the bank and deposited 3 eggs. The more the merrier, I guess. I did some more natural decorating, and when I went back to the stables, a raccoon was waiting for me. Out of nowhere, the little guy stood on his back legs and waved, and I realized he was begging for the watermelon that was in my hand. So of course, I threw him some, and he munched away. This place was really starting to feel like a wildlife reserve. Day 88, I did some cooking and worked with Carmela in the round pen. Day 89, I went to check on the pond in the pouring rain, and the eggs had hatched. producing 3 baby terrapins. I named one Squirt, one Tortellini, and one Kipo because it was purple. At night, I saddled up Prince for the sole purpose of going out to find some wolves. I thought I might know where some could be, but it was a little ways away. We traversed through the cold under the darkness, and on day 90, we made our way carefully up the snow-capped peak. Watching out for powdered snow, I got as high as I could to get a good vantage point. Up here, where the wind whipped and the chill bit, I saw a sign. An old friend, and if luck was on my side, then they were here to tell me something. Prince and I tentatively made our way down the mountain towards where the butterfly was flying, and even though we lost it in the trees, it had given us all the guidance it needed to. Nestled in the spruce trees was a small pack of wolves, and while I'm not superstitious, I might just have to start the church of the ice butterfly. You can call it coincidence, you can call it fate, but these butterflies had my back in this challenge. I picked out a light tan wolf and fed them some bones, instantly taming them. This texture pack put a sweater on them, and it reminded me oh so much of Dogbert from the original 100 Days Horse Edition. I didn't have the Doggy Talents mod installed because I really don't like the 1.20.1 version. It just adds way too many unnecessary features and items, so since this is a vanilla dog, I thought it could be a girl. As we made our way back home, I thought of the name Kyra, and it was really beautiful, so after turning Prince out in the paddock, I got a name tag and gave it to our new doggy friend. Kyra and Clover met on the porch, and they were a little unsure of each other at first, but then Kyra did the typical dog thing of standing right on top of Clover. Day 91, I went apple picking, and a raccoon stole one of the apples that I had dropped. After brushing the horses, I brought Carmela out into the round pens for some training, and after she was done, she also enjoyed some grooming. Later that afternoon, I took her out on the course for some light work, but she wasn't really feeling the jumping aspect, like at all. So instead, we just enjoyed some light exercise. In the late evening, all the horses were fast asleep, and Clover had claimed a spot on the hay pile in the tack room. Day 92 was pretty much identical, just training, caring, and having a ride on Prince. In the afternoon, I was getting a bit antsy about this baby's due date, so to play it safe, I separated Chapel by putting her in the round pen, and after doing a quick vet check, I was sure she wouldn't give birth in time. So, using the power of rose feed, we sped up the gestation, and the baby decided to come right as I had walked away to go and get something. When I returned, there was a beautiful, light baby by Chapel's side. They looked exactly like Carmela had when she was born, but it turns out this was a colt. So now Prince and Chapel had a son and Carmela had a brother. Day 93, I woke up and used my balcony to look over into the round pen where the little guy was having his breakfast. I hopped into the stables to care for Carmela and Prince, but then brought him over to see his new son. Right now, he looked like a carbon copy of his dad, but just like his sister, he would most likely mature into a different coat. Wanting to still give mum and baby some time, I tagged Prince up and walked him over to see them before we went over to the meadow to do some training. After the warm-up, he did manage to pop over some poles and even handled the triple beautifully. Just as we were heading back, the rain started and I was worried about the newborn getting too wet and cold, so after tending to the horses, I went ahead and built a shelter in the round pen, turning it into a private paddock. In the morning light of day 94, I was pleased to see Chapel and her baby had used the new shelter. Honestly, I didn't really use it for training all that much, so it's far more useful this way. After taking off all of the horses' blankets, I introduced Carmela to her baby brother, and I think she loved him. She stayed close by, wanting to keep him safe, but also gave him space when he walked away. What a beautiful and loving family they all made. I had another ride on Prince that afternoon, and we did a scenic loop of the mountain. Day 95, I decided I could wait no longer and I wanted to see the colt all grown up. To prepare, I pulled Chapel and Carmela out of the pen so that when he grew up, he had adequate space. Using my last 2 scoops of rose feed, I approached the foal and after feeding, he turned into a really pretty cremello paint. I'm not really sure what to classify this coat as. Feel free to tell me if you know. He had the cutest pink nose, and the name that came into my head for him was Otus. I quickly cracked on with making his own personal set of tack, this time going a bit untraditional with it. His accent color would be pastel yellow, and in the light of day 96, I could see what he looked like all dolled up. He had a cloth bitless bridle, a bareback blanket, and a white bareback saddle. I had really leaned into the natural horsemanship vibe for Otus, and after a short warm-up, I walked him over to the main stables to see everyone. I did notice that it was starting to look a little crowded in there, and I considered keeping Otus in a small paddock and maybe moving Marshmallow in with him. We got to do a lovely first ride, mostly playing around in the lake and stretching his legs by doing a hill canter. He was a really good boy, and while he wasn't keen on taking jumps, I was just testing to see what he enjoyed and what he wanted to do. Day 97, I set out for my last adventure. I didn't have a place in mind, no goal or item I was looking for, just good old-fashioned, let's go explore. Chapel was my mount of choice because she deserves some time out after having 2 kids, and she just loved a good trail ride. We went almost directly east, skirting around the mini sea that was just down from our property. We went really far, and while I wasn't looking for anything in particular, I was being mindful of how long we took out here because it would take us just as long to get back home. Not wanting to waste any precious time, we rode into the night, and of course I did not realize how dark it would look, but after cantering through an open plain, we headed uphill towards some cherry blossom trees. Here I practically ran into this adorable chestnut donkey who was only 12 hands tall, just like Marshmallow, too small to ride. Seeing as though this guy was pretty and short, maybe Marshmallow would like a companion of his own species. Taking this as my sign to go home, I opted to swim across the small sea instead of going around, because leading even one donkey across terrain could possibly take too long. Day 98, we reached the beach just down from the property, and I wasted no time with introducing the 2 donkeys. Figuring they needed some time to kind of suss each other out, I took care of Chapel and turned her out too. I separated Otus so we could do a little training, and in the afternoon, I concluded that the donkeys were not interested in each other, not even a little bit. There was no worry, of course. I would just go ahead with my original plan of having Marshmallow join Otus in the small pen. I watched them for a while to make sure they got on, and I think the 2 of them quite liked each other, with Marshmallow scooting closer to the horse. I chose the name Ginger Snap for the new donkey, and I was pleased to see he must have quite liked Chapel as well. Day 99, 1 day left. I wanted to really savor this day, so in the morning I watched the horses from my balcony. Stopping off at the small paddock first, Otus walked over to give me a morning cuddle. Marshmallow and him were getting on great, so after using the hula hoop as training, I moved on to the main paddock to brush all of the other horses. I caught my main girl, Chapel, and led her outside the stables where she was hitched, and I got her all tacked up in her full gear. We had a lovely warm-up. I made sure to take things nice and slow and to really enjoy it. Then I asked for a canter so that we could start getting more active, and then the fun began with jumping. This time, instead of just picking random jumps, I wanted to do the full course, and I wanted to do it with no refusals. I mucked up the first striding into the water jump, but after that, we were nailing one obstacle after another. She had such a beautiful canter, and while she did sometimes overjump, she kept nice and steady even when we did an extended canter up the hill to get to the drop jumps. She was listening to me when I collected her. She jumped the ditches really nicely, and while I was kind of nervous for both the water jump and the one right after, it turned out she was just in her stride today and she nailed both of them. I was incredibly pleased with her. She was feeling good about herself too. Almost like clockwork, it began to rain and we made our way back to the stables. I untacked her like usual, but before turning her back back out, I grabbed everyone's rugs and threw hers on. Then I made my way around to all of the horses, which I had 4 in total of, by the way, and made sure they were all snug and warm for the night too. Before bed, I grabbed Clover and Kyra and brought them into the house because the rain had actually turned into a storm and I didn't want them being scared. Then it was off to my room for my final sleep. Day 100 came and I could not have been happier. I had a few bits and bobs to finish up on my last day, which of course included taking off everyone's rugs and doing a little bit of training with Otus. The rest of the day consisted of walking around the property and admiring all the love and work that had gone into my home, knowing this might just be the last time I'm here. Personally, I think I nailed the Cottagecore challenge, but I would love for you to rate how I did out of 10, and let me know what themed series you'd like to see next. As usual, you're more than welcome to download my world and play on it yourself. Just be sure to grab the mod pack on CurseForge, link below. Thank you for watching my 100 days in a Cottagecore horse world. I really hope you enjoyed, and don't forget to shop on pinehavenponies.co.uk to get your very own model horse. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Stay positive and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!